Okay, good morning, everybody. I didn't know I was going to talk for 45 minutes, but we'll see what we can do. Michael just told me, he said, your speech might be a bit short, so you're going to have to ad-lib a little bit of it. So first, I just want to say, good morning, everybody. Of course, before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge the gathering here on the traditional territory and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I want to thank you for welcoming us to your land, and thank you for the hospitality. I also want to thank Ernie Daniels and his entire team from the First Nation Finance Authority for the invitation to be here with you today. I know when they sent the letter out that came out, it said you wanted to hear about our project back home in Mi'kma'ki, the market of Glooscap Landing, and I'm proud to tell you this story, but I want to be clear right from the start. It's really about the story about building. It's not just about building, it's a story about the nation deciding not to wait. I just wanted to talk a bit about, when I came in as chief back in 2012, our little community really only was receiving some funds from, our own source revenue was really some gaming at that time, as well as some fishing at that time as well. So we were making a little over, $3.5 million a year on that. But what I soon learned was, of course, we've got to diversify. We've got to figure out what else we can do. Prior to me coming in as council, I know that my community was run by mostly the councillors. The majority of the councillors had 3 or 4 jobs. So when I first come on, there was only really 10 people or 7 or 8 people in council or in the administration office. But from that, I understood from what I heard from the community members in regards to about the remuneration in which, council was receiving and so on and so forth. So I knew that was going to be a priority, but when I ran around the communities, listening to the people, they talked about accountability. They talked about transparency. They talked about education. They talked about housing. And they talked about, we want more jobs. So, of course, one of the things I did do was interview a lot of individuals across the province about remuneration on salaries in council. So what I did do was I implemented a structure, I guess, where councillors would be at work at the office every day. However, you weren't going to be holding a position or a job. So what we did was we took that back out to the community and said that this is what we would do. So within my first budget, the first year, it was about $430,000 cheaper than the previous one. And then that's when we started looking at hiring new people for the positions. But one of my goals was too, and we all seen it, was the frustration in regards to hiring our own people. It always had to deal with the tax issue, well, we're not going to pay you this much because you don't have to worry about taxes and so on and so forth. But one of the things I really worked hard on was trying to hire our own people who actually had the qualifications for the positions and pay them exactly what they were worth, regardless. So that took a little while to do. I hired an individual or whatever that really enjoyed doing policies, procedures, and so on and so forth. So I hired that individual to come on and help us get started. But through that first year or whatever, there was a lot of learning, all new council, and my council was fairly new to the position, so they really didn't understand how, federal agreements worked. We all understand how federal agreements worked. I worked with the federal government and understood how they worked, but also it was about long-term planning. So the other thing was about comprehensive community plan. So that was one thing that we also had to start. So the first few years was really about rebuilding, it took a lot of time for them to do that. We have an AGA similar to what you guys have every year because we talked about, remember I said about transparency. We bring everything back to the community. within our comprehensive community plan. That's what we follow. That's what we follow in regards to as we move forward. In any business that we do, we bring it back to the community. So back in, that was 2012, 13, 14 was when I said, well, we need to set up an economic development division. You know, I remember my wife always said, Sid, you got to diversify. You've been working in housing for, 25, 30 years. You got to diversify. So one of the things I did do was set up a development corporation. But I also wanted to set up the development corporation in a sense that it was going to be separate from chief and council. I don't know how many communities or organizations I've seen where we do have council that kind of get too involved with the day-to-day operations of our communities. And this one here was one, well, we had to think outside of the box, and one of the things is reaching outside of the box was to get some new people that thought differently, and that's how we designed our board of directors for our development corporation. So we had like presidents of community colleges there, we had people that worked for the municipality of Halifax. We had people that had their own businesses in Singapore and all over the world. And we had others that just kind of dealt with the day-to-day operation, as well as we had an elder from our community, and myself was the chair of it. And the only reason I wanted to ensure that on behalf of the community that we do have representation from the community, because we didn't want a development corporation to forget about what it's all about and why we're here and how important it is to bring whatever we do comes back to the community, because it's all designed to be community driven. One of the things I was worried about was a development corporation might start to try to run the community. And that's why, as being CEO, that was important for me to ensure that that didn't happen. But having said that, we also had to grow. There was a learning curve, with the community as well. And like I mentioned, every year we have our AGA, we bring everybody together. And something else I did was, we're from a small community. There's about 100 people that live in the community. There's about 500 of us all together. But what we did was, seems like a lot of the meetings we had previously, we would get maybe 10 to 15 or 20 people at our AGAs. And of course, we all know we always get the complainers that's going to show up. So what I did was, I said, well, maybe I'll change this a little bit. So I offered to pay everybody $200 to attend the meeting. That would be for your time, that would be for your expenses. So we ended up having close to 100, and I think the most we ever had was 130 people or something like that. So I told them, I said, it's just like, there we go. Now we're on an even playing field here. You pay us and our council to do a job on your behalf, and I'm paying you guys to do your job. And your job is to tell us, are we doing what we said we were going to do? Are we following, the comprehensive community plan? Is there any issues or concerns that you have? Now is the time to bring it up. So that's kind of how we do it, and we continue to do it that way. So we get pretty good turnouts, so I'm really pleased with that. So anyway, I know that we have, I'll talk now about, where we are today, and we talked about the Glooscap Market. We're really pleased to talk about that. Glooscap Landing, we purchased that through the Development Corporation back in 2015, I believe, 15 or 16. And it was a piece of land that we wanted to buy. We bought it from one of our community members. But it took 18 months to actually develop it. And what was happening is the local community members around was always against it. Even at one community hall meeting, one individual got up and said, I don't want the Indians to develop up there. I mean, oh goodness, so they were fighting this for 2 years. And you guys in business, money's got to continue to go out. You still got to pay people to sit there, whether they're working or whether they're not in some cases. So it was pretty scary for a bit, because the community members were saying, well, what are you guys doing in economic development? This is where we want to develop. We're just running into some delays. So So you have to be, really patient with that. So we ended up getting Glooscap Landing, a couple years later, and then that's when we started to develop. So we ended up developing a gas bar, and Tim Hortons was our first big development. Like we have where we're located between Halifax and Annapolis Valley, there's about 14,000 vehicles that continue to pass our landing. We said, well, what can we do to kind of attract those individuals, and hopefully they'll come into our gas bar or Tim Hortons, and then hopefully the money we get from that will generate and come back to the community. So that was our first big development. And so then the next big development, which we're going to talk about today, is actually, the market at Glooscap Landing. So this market at Glooscap Landing is a market or whatever that's opening. It's actually opening up this week. So it's a good timing for us. I'm here. Michael, my CEO, is here as well. But are we missing the opening, Michael? We're missing the opening. Just to be here for you guys. But anyway, like I mentioned, we do come from a small community. Our community members changed the name from Horton First Nation to Glooscap First Nation. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the Glooscap stories and creation. He was one of the creators, from down around where we live and off of Cape Bloomington. But one of the things and traits in which he talked about as a creator was creating a land base and stuff for everybody to benefit. But not only that, his expectations, of course, was to benefit, to create it, to build it, but also to understand that, we want to create it for long-term benefits for everybody, for, even people we may never meet. But it's important that, we follow those visions and those goals of what Glooscap, our creator, has put forward. And so that's when they changed the name to Glooscap First Nation. So from that, we then started getting involved with FNFA. And I must admit, thank goodness for FNFA. I remember when we first purchased the piece of land, and we didn't get it we didn't create it into a reserve, only because we never had the means of doing that. But with FNFA and FMB, things really changed, and it really turned the thing around. But one of the things as being a small community, it was, are we going to make it or are we not going to make it? Do we watch everybody else? Do we not watch everybody else? And, one of the things I thought was really important was getting some direction from board members that's been into the world and seeing how things work outside of the First Nation world. Because we all know how difficult it is when we first get started in some of our communities. Are they going to come? Are they not going to come? Because a lot of them said, well, we're not going to go to your Tim Hortons. We're going to go to the local Tim Hortons downtown. Okay, that's fine too, but you don't know until you actually take that risk. And I know that a lot of you are probably thinking, should I, shouldn't I? Is council on board? Is my community on board? And I must admit, it's a new thinking on our First Nations world to move on some of these big projects that we're moving on. And again, through FNFA, it would not have been made possible if it wasn't for, Ernie and his team to come and talk to us and talk to our CEOs of our development corporations. I just really want to give a hand out to FNFA for creating this for us, not only us and the Glooscap, but everybody across the country. And we see the successes from FNFA. You take a look at some of the boards over here of how many jobs, 40-some thousand jobs, has been created, and the billions of dollars that's been lent out to the communities. It's an awesome thing to think that us as First Nations are now being looked at much differently. We get corporate companies coming to us. We've got businesses, local businesses coming to us and knowing the benefits from what you have created. I just want to say, you know, the Glooscap Landing and the market, well, the market was really important to us because we all know that we have our community members. They have certain strengths and, you know, in working, and some don't want to leave the communities, and some don't have, you know, the vehicles and so on to go very far for work, you know, but also a lot of them, you know, are artists and artisans, and some of them grow their own food and have their own farms, and then some of them, like ourselves, we have our own fish plant and our own fish processing plant. So the market that we thought about creating was going to be create an opportunity for our community members. Because one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, our community members was getting a bit upset with us, saying, what are you doing for us as community members? You set up the gas bar, you set up the Tim Hortons, well, everybody else is benefiting, but what about us? What can you do for us? So one of the things we thought about, well, maybe the market, you know, it would be created for you guys. It's only 3-4 kilometers from the community. So it's a place where we can have our fishermen fish the product, we buy the fish product from them, and then we sell the product on their behalf. The same thing with our artisans. We've got a place where we're going to set it up, where they have a place they can go up and they can sell their crafts, whether it's baskets, arts, whatever it might be, and then they can set it all up there, and it's part of their community, so they don't have to go very far. The other thing is trying to create an environment, an atmosphere that helps our youth to say, it can be done, it can be done. And we have the space for you to make it happen. You know, there's a lot of times that we create a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to create employment and opportunities for community members, you know, but a lot of times they're lacking certain expertise or technical experience. But how can we do a much better job on that? You know, but through the market, I think it's going to be an awesome place. And like I said, if it wasn't help from FNFA to allow us to borrow that money, it's a $4 million project, and I think we borrowed around $2.7 million from FNFA to make it happen. And now we actually see it, and the community see it. So I'm hoping at our AGA meeting this year, things might go a little smoother, but you guys know what those can be like. But having said that, you know, there's a couple other things in which, you know, our small communities got involved with. We've joined partnerships with a few others, and we purchased, you know, what was it, 7 casinos, I think, in Alberta, and a few hotels. So that's a big project. That's a big partnership we've created with others. And then there's a few others. I never ever thought that, you know, Glooscap First Nation would ever be owning a casino. You asked me 10 years ago, and I love dreaming, but I don't think I'm going to dream that big. But having said that, to think that it all come together, you know, for the communities, and plus creating, you know, the partnerships with a few of our other First Nations, that's a real good benefit for us. And I really look forward to, you know, to working with the communities. I often told Michael, our CEO, I said, just remember, we're open for business, you know, and now where is the business? It doesn't matter where the business is. You know, at the end of the day, whatever revenues that comes back, because it comes back as a community, our development corporation is part of the community, it's community run, and it's those guys that make the decision on where the funds go. But we also know that we have to ensure that we have dollars set aside for new business opportunities, you know, but creating gatherings like this and hearing it from various communities across the country how successful things actually have happened, you know, from the FNFA, it's really good in creating the, you know, the friendship and partnerships that can be here from one coast to the other coast to the other coast. We're open for business as First Nations, and I think we're in a great opportunity now. Now's the time to do it. We see Kearney's interested in working with us, the 5% procurement on some of these bigger projects, I think is a great opportunity. So I don't know how I did Mike. Mike's my CEO, and he kind of tells me, this is what you're supposed to do and this is what you're supposed to say. But I just want to say it's a great opportunity to be here. And I look forward to, working with you guys and sharing what we did. It wasn't easy, that's for sure, and didn't happen overnight. It takes time, but also, gradually building the support from your community, that's a big thing. And also being aware that, there's lots of companies and organizations and people out there. There is still some good people out there that's willing to work with us, and watch us grow and grow with us. That's really important. So I think that, Mike, hopefully I covered pretty well everything. But I do must say that, it's like anything else, you got to prove yourself, and then once you start to prove yourself and you're open for business, and I think being respectful, and being there and being ready, that's one thing we got to learn is in the business world, you got to turn things around. You can't be waiting on council in some cases to make some decisions. You have to do your due diligence, and it's important to have good people that do all that due diligence for you, because don't forget, I'm representing my community, not Chief Sidney Peters, but my community, and it's their money. It's not my money. It's our money. But how do we make that money grow on behalf of the community to build a life much better than it was before over the generations for our community members. I'm not sure how long I took, but I guess I'm open for any questions.
Miigwech, Chief, Wulalan, as they say out in the East. Yes, round of applause. I'm going to ask Jackie and Brianna to just grab some mics. And part of this is about engagement from other nations from right across Canada, other members that want to know more about the Glooscap story, the nation's story, and something that we heard earlier from Stefan was about building this narrative and building a compelling story for our nations and what's being done. And we often, we're somebody that we always say every loan tells a story. It's one of our taglines, and we feel that it's important to lift up our communities and celebrate the successes, because there's always other nations out there from no matter where you're coming in from across Turtle Island who need to learn and need to understand and have questions without feeling like you have to reinvent the wheel. So this is an opportunity and a space to engage in discussion, and I would welcome any questions from the floor for the Chief. Brianna.
Chief, just two quick questions. Your board membership, or the member of the board, are they all First Nation? You were saying they were diverse.
No, they're not all First Nations. And that was important to us too. Sometimes I think that in order to think outside of the box, let's get I guess the priority was getting people that had a skill set that we may not have as a skill set, right? So that's kind of what we looked at. That's why we had a variety of different board members that brought different skill set to the board. When we first started, the board was created to get the Development Corporation up and running. So we created that, but then as things started getting busier and busier, we then redesigned our board. We needed a different skill set, more on the business side skill set. So we did change the board and went out and looking for new board membership. So that's kind of what helped create our board where we are today.
Thank you. Second question, if I understood correctly, you create a space for the market. How does it work, that space for the members? Just wondering, and how it's looking like.
How it's looking? Sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
Yeah, how it's looking like, that space, and how it's operate.
Well, it's like anything, we hope that it's almost like Kevin Costner, you build it, will they come? I mean, that's the thing. But it's based on what we've heard from the community members. This is what they're looking for, and this is what they want. And like we mentioned about the traffic that's going by, if we can start attracting some of that traffic, because one of the things we did do is, when I set up the Development Corporation, I took a busload of community members, about 45 of us, and went around various First Nation communities to talk about economic development. I really wanted the community to be aware of how other communities are working and is it working. So one of the communities we went to was it was in Masstown, and it's the Masstown Market, and we really talked to them. It's a small community outside of Truro, about 15 minutes outside of Truro, which is the hub of Nova Scotia, they call it. But this particular market is a destination, and if you talk to anybody in Atlantic Canada, for sure, they all know where Masstown Market is. And it was just designed from a family back in 1961, I think, is when it started. It was just a farmer that started, and they started selling their vegetables, and now it's a multi-million-dollar operation. So our CEO and stuff met with them and talked about what they did, so that's how we've kind of started creating ours. And we're just starting. We got to realize that, it's only been, a little over 10 years to get where we are today. The market, well, like they said, it was almost 60 years to get to where they are today, right? And everybody knows, Chief Terry from Member 2. Chief Terry's been over there, at Member 2 for 40-some years. And Member 2 didn't happen overnight. You got to be patient. It's going to take time, that's for sure. But I'm also seeing, now that as things move forward and communities are doing well, other people are starting to come to us, where before we were always out there looking and searching, but now people are coming to us in regards to partnership and stuff. But we're hoping that, the market, hopefully, it does well. Like I said, we've got our own fish plant, so why can't we sell our own fish? For example, in the fish industry and the lobster industry in the East Coast, and probably, I'm not sure out here, but a lot of our sales went to the U.S. And once the U.S. stopped that, and then with the tariffs, it really made it difficult for us. So we're hoping maybe this might change things around.
Well added.
Okay. Somebody else.
Good morning. Thank you for your opportunity for hearing about First Nation and how you're developing that. One key question I'd like to ask is, when you talked about creating outside investment and you got other 5 First Nations to come together, maybe you could just talk about how long that took to get those other 4 nations to help and be part of your generating, because there's always an obstacle for getting other First Nations to join and do an investment. So if you could just kind of talk a little bit on that, how you created the other 4 nations to come in and invest into your corporation.
Sure. I'll tell you, but you may not believe it. We had an AGA at one of our tribal councils, Confederacy Mainland Mi'kmaq. At that point in time, we were going through this deal for the casinos, and it just happened that one of the other big partners was no longer interested to participate. Why? I don't know 100%, whether there was an election or whatever might have taken place. So they come back to us and said, do you know any other communities? So to be honest with you, there was a room similar like this, and we were at a meeting and talking about an AGA. And I went around from table to table and talked to, 5 of the communities, said, look, are you guys interested? I only need 5 minutes of your time. because everybody was taking their vacations and so on and so forth after this. So with that, I spent about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, if that, at each board with their chief and their council. I talked to them about this initiative, seeing if you guys were interested. If you're interested, it's in the business world, things happen a heck of a lot faster, so you have to be on the ball. So I said that if you're really interested and you're really keen on it, we would look for some BCRs and so on and so forth, and we'd have to have them, you know, before the end of July, for example. So this was, I think the middle of July, we had our AGA, and we had to have something concrete by August. So we did. We had the communities come around by August. They said, we're ready to go. We're ready to move. And then by December, the purchase happened, and things happened, and we purchased it. So it went from July to like a half-hour discussion with them. Because I did say we've already done all our due diligence on this, and it seems like a good deal, right? If anybody knows in regards to when you're dealing with gaming and you're dealing with a lot of money, believe me, the government wants to see that money. They want to make sure that they get all their taxes. So believe me, you know, the finances are usually up to date. So having said that, so I guess it went from there to August, and then December, the purchase actually took place. It happened really, really fast, and so I don't know whether that answers the question, but I think, again, it's about relationship building and having the trust, you know, in the communities. And not only that, is ensuring that, you know, the communities trust you as a community or a leader or an organization. If they don't, then they'll say, well, I'm not quite sure. So that's kind of where it went from there. So it happened really, really quick. Yeah. Okay. Well, if there's no other, oh, there's a question over here.
Good morning. Thank you for all of your comments and your presentation. It was really informative for me. I'm newly elected into my position as council for my nation and Cold Lake First Nations. One of the things that I have, and one of the things that you mentioned, was getting memberships to your AGA. You had done a honorarium of $200. I looked at your nation, your small nation. My nation's about 3,500 as it goes in, but with yours, you have half your community off reserve as well. How do you deal with your off reserve members to help support the initiatives that you have going forward with your businesses?
Sorry, my phone was ringing. It's going to my hearing aids when you were speaking.
They're whispering to tell you something, to tell me something really good.
Somebody's trying to help me out here and give me the answer. Yeah, it was one of these things that I really felt strongly about, is trying to get my membership to the meetings. You know, was it expensive? Well, it seemed like it was expensive at the time. You know, it was like $30,000, $40,000. You know, but some of this stuff is too. I mean, like our little store and stuff, and a few other things, is we made sure that the store was stocked up. Seems like our First Nation people, everybody likes to smoke cigarettes, so we made sure that we had lots of cigarettes and stuff for them. So a lot of the funds that we gave, you know, still did come back to the community. And not only that, we also have at our AGA, is we have our business meeting the first day, and the next day we have what is called Fun Day, and it's for all the children and all the kids. And I also thought, well, the $200 isn't that much, but our community members live in other provinces and stuff, and I said, well, if you've got a family of 4 or 5, there's $1,000 to help you get to the community meeting, and you get to visit your relatives and friends and so on and so forth, and see exactly where the community is going and where it's moving. So it's an open meeting. They can stand up and say whatever they want and kind of go from there. I mean, there is structure, of course. You know, what we really want to hear from them is, are we doing what we said we were going to do? And I think it's really important, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20-year, you know, plans down the road. And one other thing, I guess, is a big benefit in our community It's a custom band community, so the elections happens every 5 years. So if you have a 5-year term, it gives you the opportunity to clean up some stuff, to do things, to do some planning, and bring it back. You know, but you also, within that 5 years, you got to prove yourself or see things happen and see things moving. I must say, not every project we had went well. We got involved with this one project. It was called feta cheese or whatever, from Greece and stuff. Anyway, I just often say, well, it was just the cheese spoiled on us, and it didn't happen. Anyway, so it did cost us, but like I said, not everything goes as planned, but we learned a lot from that. Right? You get some smooth operators out there that can talk and speak and stuff too. So that's one thing you need to be careful of as well. And again, when presentation, these guys come in, it's not just talking to me, he's talking not just Michael, CEO, you're talking to the whole board, and this is how it works. So I'm not sure if that answers the question or not, but I think it's important to try to get your community members to your meetings if you have them. Yeah.
We have 4 a year as far as it goes for us. Four meetings a year, and we have 1 AGM. But where the struggle for us is we're trying to get our members, we're trying to get our members that are off reserve to have input in a lot of our investment companies, because we have to have ratifications and stuff in there, and our information goes out quite often. It's just how do we, I was looking at your structure and wondering how your members go, because you have a lot that are off reserve as well, you know, and that integration of support from both sides on and off really makes a difference. I know government-wise, funding-wise, we're very limited as to what we can get, because our on-reserve members are where our money comes from, and our off-reserve always gets left behind. But the business side of it, that's where the investments come in, and that's where the opportunities to help support them are. But we also need to ensure that they have the ability to have a say. So that was the intent.
Yeah, so what we've done is, basically our community was never started until 1982. We were all part of another community, Annapolis Valley First Nations, and I'm not sure, I think members are from here, but we were all part of Annapolis Valley, but we all lived off reserve. But back then, as you know, the way the communities were all set up, there was never no funding to support you whatsoever off reserve, right? I mean, you were barely making ends meet as it was on reserve. So an opportunity to come up with a piece of land which was about 30 minutes from Annapolis Valley. And then there was the Chief Rita Smith, who was the chief of Annapolis Valley at the time, but she was residing in this place called Hortonville or whatever, and then there was 400 and some acres there, close to 500 acres. So then she started looking at a possibility of creating a reserve there. So really what she did was she then went around and started recruiting a lot of Annapolis Valley members that resided off reserve and asked, would you guys be interested in creating another reserve? So that's kind of how it all started back in 1982, really. And then she contacted my dad, and my dad there's 14 in my family, so he had all of us young people, and then of course his brothers and sisters, they asked them. So really there was 5 families that made up our community back in 1982. So really we've got about close to 450 band members altogether, and a lot of them live off reserve. We've got about 100 that's on reserve. But it's important that, we try to create, getting our information out to them, whether it's on, Facebook or the website or internet, whatever it might be, and newsletters. So we continue to try to do that as much as we can. We have a fairly big population that live in the United States. As we know, back then, years ago, a lot of people in First Nations couldn't find work around home, so they all took off and went down the New England coast and did whatever, whatever work was available. I often say we were migrant workers before migrant workers was even thought of, but that's what we had to do, and a lot of them went there for work. So that's where a lot of our community members, we've got a meeting in November, we'll we'll go down and meet our members outside of Boston, I think, just to talk to them as an AGA, similar to what we do here, just so that they feel they're part of it. And it's interesting. I remember how I mentioned, I said, we give $200 for anybody that, comes. You have to be 18 and over is the only thing. So we offered the same thing to our community members in the United States, and they said, no, we don't want it. Except we want to help this young girl or whatever. She's got 6 kids, and she's having difficulty to get things going, and they all wanted to give the money to her. So that was a really nice gesture. So, good.
I just have one more question. I think in your earlier entries when you were speaking on how creating an economic development board, it took took a little while to get people to get on board as council. Could you maybe explain what you have now in your current board for if it's your I'll say expertise from off reserve? Do you have community members? Do you have council on that board, and what that structure kind of looks at?
Yeah, we have that particular board. I'm the chair of that board, but we do have a couple councilors that's on the board, and right now we're looking for an elder to be on part of that board. And the others, like I said, is we've got one gentleman that's worked in the selling seafood and stuff all over the world, so he's part of it. We had another gentleman, actually, he used to be a mayor out here in Chilliwack, and he's in Nova Scotia now, so on part of governance, we have him. We had also another gentleman that worked as a CEO with other organizations and First Nations and started his own business and stuff, so he's on our board. And then we have another one that's really high level in regards to, financing and understand how financing and stuff works. And I'll be honest, financing or whatever in the First Nation world, I often said, I said it's like a hot potato. Once you get it, get rid of it, because if you don't, then God knows where's it going to go, right? So that's important. So we had to have those guys and have a good structure. But it was important, to ensure that our financial records and stuff were, was well done. Has that been easy? I'll tell you, trying to find a finance person or whatever that'll stick around and will do what's necessary and help us and be on top of stuff, it's not that easy, and it's expensive. It's expensive. And then once you start getting good qualified people or whatever, it's not cheap to hire them, that's for sure. But again, there's expectations. Us as leadership and us as our community, there is expectations that they have to ensure that these gentlemen or women are going to perform. So it's important to ensure, like remember I talked about HR policies, procedures. It's important to have a lot of that in place. And it's a different way of life in some of our First Nation communities to say, okay, you got to be accountable. You got to be accountable. It's not my money. I'm paying you. It's our community money, and they're watching. Believe me, they're watching everybody. Are you showing up or you're not showing up? Are you performing? And that's the important part at our AGAs, how important it is to say that this is what we said we were going to do. Again, I go back to that, and this is where we are. But I also think it's important. I often say you don't know what you don't know. Like some of this stuff is, that's why we bring other people in. And be open. I think openness is so important to share. Are we experts? No, we're not experts. I'll be the first one to say that. But I just want to ensure that, we're here to work together on behalf of our community, just to make it better than it was before. That's the main goal. Thanks.